hello, and welcome to the Sleep Story. I'm glad you found your way here tonight. Come in, there's no hurry, wherever you're settled right now. Whether that's your bed, your sofa, some quiet corner you've made your own, I'm glad you're there, and I'm glad we have a little time together. Tonight, I'd like to take you somewhere quite far from here, to a small island. No name on any map, no record of it anywhere, sitting somewhere in a warm and unhurried sea. There's a camp there, just a canvas tent and a low fire and a hammock strung between two old trees, and a man named Edmund who has spent his days here pressing flowers into journals and listening to birds he cannot yet name. It is evening now. The rain has only just passed. The air smells of wet earth and wood smoke and something sweet that the world has not yet found a word for. Edmund has no particular place to be. Neither, tonight, do you. It's a gentle story. Nothing dramatic happens in it. And I think that's exactly what it's for. But before we make our way to that island, I'd like to take just a moment with you here, wherever here is. So if you haven't already, let yourself get truly comfortable. Adjust the pillow. Pull the covers a little closer if you like. Let your eyes close, or let them soften. Take your time. There's no rush at all. There's no rush tonight. None at all. Whatever the day asked of you, whatever it took, you can set it down now, right here. You don't need to carry it any further. The evening has come, and with it, permission to simply rest. So let's begin there, with your body, with where you are right now. Notice the surface beneath you, the mattress, holding you. It has been there all day, quietly waiting for this moment, waiting for you to return to it. And here you are. Feel how it rises to meet you. Feel the gentle, steady support of it beneath your shoulders, your back, the backs of your legs. You don't have to hold yourself up. You never had to. Not here. Let the mattress do that work. Let yourself be held. And your pillow. Notice your pillow. The soft weight of your head resting into it. Perhaps it's cool against your cheek, or warm from where you've already settled. Either way, it's familiar. It knows you. Let your head grow heavier now, just a little. Let it sink, your shoulders. Notice if there's any tension living there, not to force it out, just to notice it. Sometimes that's enough. Just the act of noticing will allow a little softening to begin on its own. Your arms can be heavy now, your hands open or loosely closed, however they've fallen. That's fine. That's exactly right. Feel the warmth of your sheets around you, that quiet, enclosed warmth that belongs only to this place, only to this hour. There's something ancient about it, the comfort of being covered, of being still, of the world outside growing smaller and further away. And now, gently bring your attention to your breath. You don't need to change it. You don't need to make it deeper or slower or different in any way. Just notice it. The soft rise of your chest, the slow release. The small, faithful rhythm your body has been keeping all day without you ever having to ask. Follow that rhythm for a moment, in and out. The world growing quieter with each breath. Your thoughts beginning to loosen at the edges, like ink in water, slowly dispersing. And when you are ready, let your eyes close and let me take you somewhere quiet tonight. The rain had come and gone. It had moved through the island in the early afternoon, a brief, warm shower that arrived without announcement and left just as quietly, taking nothing with it but the dust and leaving behind a world that looked freshly made. The broad, waxy leaves of the canopy still held the last of it in small, trembling pools, and every few seconds one of those pools would tip and fall, a single drop landing on the moss below with a sound so soft it was barely a sound at all, more a punctuation mark than a noise. A small, patient reminder that the world was still moving, still breathing, still going gently about its business. Edmund heard it without listening to it. That was the thing about the dripping. It had become part of the texture of the island, woven into the air the same way the smell of wet earth was woven into it, the same way the distant murmur of the freshwater stream on the far side of the tree line had become something he no longer noticed as a separate sound, but simply felt as a kind of presence. He had been on the island for 4 days. 4 days was long enough for the sounds to stop being sounds and start being something more like company. He was sitting at his folding table in the last of the evening light. The table was a simple thing, dark-stained wood, the kind that folded flat and could be carried under one arm, and he had set it up on the first morning just outside the entrance of the canvas tent, facing the tree line. Tonight, it was covered. That was the word for it. There were pressed specimens laid out on squares of blotting paper, each one placed with care, each one dried to a pale and fragile version of itself, but still recognizably what it had been in the forest, a curved leaf with a silvery underside. A cluster of tiny flowers gone from white to cream in the pressing, a length of vine with nodes spaced so evenly they might have been measured. Between the specimens lay his open journal, its pages thick with notes written in a small, unhurried hand, and beside the journal a stub of pencil worn flat on one side where he rested his thumb. He picked up the pencil and turned it slowly in his fingers. The light was going, not gone, not yet, but going, the way light in this part of the world went in the early evening, gradually and then all at once, the gray-gold quality of it deepening, the shadows under the fern fronds growing more solid and deliberate. He had perhaps another 20 minutes before he would need the lantern, and he was in no hurry to reach for it. There was something he liked about working in this diminishing light, the way it required a small amount of extra attention, the way it slowed him down further than he was already slowed, which was saying something. He was not, by nature, a quick man. His colleagues at the survey office would have used other words. Meticulous, perhaps thorough. One of them, older, impatient, always with ink on his cuff, had once said with what was meant to be dry affection that Edmund could spend a full morning on 2 square feet of ground and still feel he had rushed it. Edmund had taken this as a compliment, though it had not been meant as one. He set the pencil down and reached for the botanical folio. It was the largest object on the table, a heavy thing, cloth-bound, its cover softened from handling into something almost supple. Inside, between sheets of cartridge paper, were the specimens he had already pressed, arranged, labeled, their measurements recorded in the narrow columns he had ruled at the top of each page. He lifted it carefully with both hands and set it at the center of the table, then opened it to the next blank set of pages. The smell came up as the pages opened. It always did. It was a green smell, papery and slightly sweet, and entirely itself the smell of dried plant matter and old cartridge paper, and something underneath both of those things that he could not have named and did not try to, the smell of the specimens themselves, of the forest they had come from, pressed and preserved and still faintly, improbably alive between the pages. He had been smelling it for 4 days, and it had not yet become ordinary. He did not think it would. He took the first of the day's specimens, the curved leaf with the silvery underside, and held it up in the gray-gold light. It was perhaps 15 centimeters long, narrowing to a fine point. With the midrib so clearly defined, it looked almost architectural, like something built rather than grown. The underside was the thing that had stopped him when he first found it that morning. A surface so pale and smooth it seemed to catch the light differently from everything around it, throwing it back in a way that made the leaf seem to glow very faintly from within. He had spent a long time with it in the forest. He had turned it over several times. He had held it up against the sky and watched the light come through the tissue of it like light through thin cloth. He set it now in the center of the blotting paper square. From the journal he read back his own field notes, the location where he had found it, the approximate height of the tree, the way it grew in clusters rather than singly, its preference for the shadowed side of the trunk. He added a measurement, 14.8 centimeters. He wrote this in the narrow column and underlined it once, lightly. Overhead, a drop of rainwater fell from the canopy and landed somewhere in the undergrowth. A small, hollow sound, like a single note played quietly on an instrument he had no name for. Then another. Then silence for a moment, and then another still, coming from a slightly different direction, a slightly different pitch. Edmund listened to them without meaning to. He pressed the leaf between two sheets of cartridge paper and set the folio gently on top to weight it. Then he turned to the vine with its evenly spaced nodes, and the small cream-colored flowers, and spent a while deciding which of them to press next, and which to leave until morning. There was a satisfaction in this deciding, small and quiet and entirely his own. The satisfaction of having more interesting things than time could hold, which was a condition he had always preferred to its opposite. The pencil made a soft sound against the journal page. He was recording the nodes now, their spacing, 4 centimeters, and a fraction, consistent throughout the length of vine he had collected. He pressed harder on the pencil when he wanted a firm line, lighter when he was writing text, and the difference in pressure was something his hand knew without his having to think about it. He could feel the grain of the page through the pencil's lead. He could feel the slight resistance and then the give of the paper's surface under each stroke. A drop fell from the canopy. Then another, a longer pause. Then 3 in quick succession from 3 different leaves, each one slightly different in pitch and weight, so that they made something almost like a small rhythm before the silence returned. Edmund finished the node measurements, turned back a page to check something he had written in the morning, turned forward again. The gray-gold light had deepened another degree. The shadows under the fern fronds were very solid now, almost architectural in their own right. He could still read his own handwriting. He pressed the vine between its sheets of cartridge paper, weighted it, and sat back in his wooden camp chair for a moment, not doing anything at all. This was something he had learned to do here, on this island, in 4 days. Simply sit. Not think about the next thing. Not reach for the next specimen or turn to the next blank page. Just sit for a moment in the evening air, with the smell of the wet forest and the pressed plants and the far-off wood smoke beginning now from his fire, and let the island be exactly what it was. He was aware, sitting there in the dimming light, of a faint restlessness underneath the quiet. It was not unhappiness. He would not have called it that. It was more the feeling that sometimes comes to a person after several days alone, not loneliness exactly. Not yet, but a kind of awareness of one's own edges. The sense of being a single point in a large and breathing world. He had felt it in the afternoon, walking back through the forest with his collected specimens, and he felt it now, sitting at his table with the day's work mostly done and the evening still ahead of him. It was a flutter, nothing more. The sort of feeling that a cup of tea and the sound of another person moving nearby would dissolve entirely. He reached for the lantern. It was a simple oil lamp, squat and brass, with a glass chimney he had wrapped in cloth for transport and a wick he had trimmed that morning. He held it up and tilted it to check the oil level. Sufficient. More than sufficient. Then set it back on the corner of the table and reached for the box of matches he kept in the breast pocket of his field coat. The match flared. He touched it to the wick. The flame took hold with a small, steady warmth. Not dramatic, just present. A circle of amber light that reached out from the lantern and touched the open journal page, the pressed specimens, the edges of the table, the back of his hands. The gray gold of the evening outside the circle was suddenly more gray than gold. The amber light was suddenly the warmest thing in the world. He shook the match out and set it on the edge of the fire ring. And it was at that moment, just as the lantern settled into its quiet burning, that he heard the sound of footsteps on the mossy path from the forest. Not startling footsteps, not hurried ones. Simply footsteps, the soft, unhurried tread of someone who knew exactly where she was going and had no particular reason to hurry. Sella appeared at the edge of the camp. She was carrying something wrapped in a large leaf, a broad tropical leaf folded into a loose parcel and tied with a thin length of vine. She carried it in both hands, held slightly out from her body the way one carries something that should be kept level, and she walked into the circle of amber light and set it on the corner of his table without ceremony, without preamble, with the ease of someone who had done this or something like it many times before. She did not sit down immediately. She looked at the table, the open journal, the folio, the specimens in their squares of blotting paper, with the same expression she always had, which was an expression of easy interest, the kind of interest that does not require explanation and does not offer any. Then she moved to her place on the other side of the campfire, where the root of one of the broad-trunked trees curved up from the ground to make a natural seat, low and smooth, the bark worn by repeated use to a surface almost like worked wood. She settled onto it and drew from the pouch at her belt a length of dark fiber, dense and slightly rough, and began to work it between her fingers with the focused patience of someone who has done this kind of work long enough that the hands know what to do without asking. Edmund looked at the parcel on his table. He looked at it for a moment, then reached over and unfastened the vine tie and opened the leaf wrapping. Inside were 3 fruits. He had not seen them before. They were ovoid, roughly the size and shape of a large egg, with a skin that was waxy to the touch and very slightly warm, as though they had been sitting in the last of the afternoon sun. Their color was a deep, saturated orange, the kind of orange that seems to generate its own light rather than reflect it, and the skin had a very fine texture under his fingertips, almost imperceptible, like the texture of good paper. The smell came up to him. It was floral. That was the first word. Floral and warm and slightly sweet, with something underneath the sweetness that was almost savory, not unpleasantly so, but in the way that very ripe tropical fruit sometimes has a complexity to it, a depth that single words cannot quite reach. He held one of the fruits near the lantern and turned it slowly. The waxy skin caught the amber light and held it, and the fruit seemed for a moment like something made, rather than grown, something considered. He set it back carefully with the others and opened his journal to a fresh page. He did not know the name. He would not try to invent one. He drew instead. He drew the way he always drew, slowly, beginning with the overall form and working inward toward the details, letting the pencil follow what he saw rather than what he expected to see. The curve of the skin here, the slight dimpling at the stem end, the way the 3 fruits sat together in the leaf wrapping, touching at their widest points, the small shadows between them. He drew all of it without hurrying. Across the fire, Selah's hands moved through the fiber with a steady, even rhythm, He could hear it, a soft, dry sound, almost like the turning of pages as the fiber ran through her fingers, and she worked it into something that had not existed before. She did not look at it. She looked at the fire, or at the forest beyond the camp, or occasionally at the drawing he was making, but her hands knew the work completely and needed no supervision. The campfire was small and steady. He had built it before the rain came, and it had burned down to coals during the shower, and he had added 2 pieces of wood when he came back to camp in the evening, and it had caught again without difficulty. The way fires on this island always seemed to as though the wood here had been waiting patiently for the right moment and was pleased to be asked. It gave off a smell of wood smoke that mixed with the smell of the wet forest and the papery green smell of the specimens on his table and the warm floral scent of the 3 orange fruits, and the whole combination was something he had no single word for. It was the smell of the evening. It was the smell of this island, of these 4 days, of sitting at this table with this lantern in this particular circle of amber warmth. He finished the drawing of the fruits and sat back to look at it. It was good. Not his best work. The light was not ideal for drawing, even with the lantern, and he had slightly misjudged the curve of the skin on the leftmost fruit, but it captured the essential quality of them, the weightedness, the warm color suggested through shading alone. He added a note below the drawing in small, neat letters, collected by S. Species unknown. Skin waxy, slightly warm. Scent floral sweet. Then he left a space below the note for the name to be filled when he had it. The dripping from the canopy had slowed. It was not gone. It would not be fully gone until morning, he had learned. But the drops were coming less frequently now, spaced further apart, each one landing in its own moment of quiet. The moss, the underside of a fern frond, somewhere in the leaf litter just beyond the firelight. A long pause, and then a drop. Another long pause, and then 2 in quick succession. Silence again. Edmund set the pencil down and stretched his hands, pressing his palms together and then spreading his fingers wide, feeling the small pull of muscles held in one position too long. He looked up at the sky through the gap in the canopy above the camp. The last gray gold of the evening was gone. In its place was the very dark blue of earliest night, not black yet, but deep enough that the first stars were visible, 2 of them, or perhaps 3, small and steady between the silhouettes of the fern fronds. He watched them for a moment. There was something about this time of evening that he had tried to write about in his journal and had not yet found the right words for. It was the moment when the day let go, when the light stopped asking anything of the eye and the eye was free to rest or wander, when the sounds of the forest shifted, the daytime birds gone quiet, the night sounds not yet fully arrived, a brief hush in between that lasted only minutes but felt, somehow, longer than that. He had felt it on each of the 4 evenings he had been here, and he felt it now, a kind of gentleness in the air, a permission to stop. He sat in it for a while, across the fire. The dry sound of Sella's work continued, steady, unhurried, the fiber moving through her hands in its slow transformation. She had not spoken since she arrived. She rarely spoke in the evenings. This was something Edmund had understood about her by the 2nd day, that she was a person who was comfortable in silence in the way that some people are comfortable in a familiar room, without needing to fill it with anything. It was, he thought, one of the most restful qualities a person could have. The fire gave a small, soft settling sound as one of the pieces of wood shifted against its neighbor. Edmund looked at the journal, then at the forest edge, and felt the beginning of something, a pull, faint and unhurried. Earlier in the day, when he had been making his way back through the undergrowth with the afternoon specimens, he had noticed a vine growing along the base of a large rooted tree. not far from the camp, perhaps 20 paces into the forest. It had been interesting for its leaves, palmate, with an unusual papery texture, but what had truly stopped him was the flowers, dozens of them along the length of the vine, each one tightly furled into a pointed bud, closed completely, green-white and neat. He had noted them in his field journal and kept walking, but he had wondered, in the way he always wondered about such things, what they looked like when they opened. He stood slowly, his chair making a quiet sound against the moss. He reached for the lantern. Sella looked up at the motion. He held up the lantern and tilted his head toward the forest, and she glanced in that direction and then back at him and nodded once, a single unhurried nod, as if to say, "Yes, that seems reasonable. Go and look at whatever it is you want to look at." He carried the lantern to the edge of the camp and stepped off the moss onto the leaf-covered ground of the forest floor. 20 paces. That was all. He counted them as he walked, not because he needed to, but because the counting gave a shape to the short distance, and also because he was the kind of person who liked to know things precisely, who found precision not limiting but comforting, the way a good frame comforts a painting. His boots made a soft sound on the leaves. The lantern swung gently in his hand, and the amber circle of light swung with it, illuminating the ground ahead of him in shifting pieces, a root, a patch of moss, a cluster of small mushrooms pale as cream, a fern uncurling from its tight spiral in a way that seemed almost deliberate, almost chosen. He counted to 17 and then stopped. Because there was the vine. He held the lantern up. The flowers had opened, every single one of them. All along the length of the vine had opened while the light was going, had waited. It seemed for exactly this, for the world to grow dark enough, for the air to cool a single degree toward evening, for whatever signal it was they were waiting for. And they had opened into something enormous. He crouched down. Each bloom was the size of his open palm, wide, many-petaled, with petals so thin that when he held the lantern close, he could see the amber light pass through them as though through paper held to a window. They were white. Not the white of chalk or bone, but the white of something luminous from within, the white that exists in the space between white and pale gold. At the center of each flower, a cluster of stamens rose in a tight column, dusted at their tips with something that caught the lantern light and held it, not glittering exactly, but present, the way early morning dew is present on a surface, quietly insisting on itself. And the smell. It was the same family of sweetness as the orange fruits on his table, but opened up, expanded, given more room, a warm, floral. It was the scent of a thing that had been waiting all day, saving itself, and was now quietly, unhurriedly spending what it had. Edmund stayed crouched for a long time. He did not write anything. He did not measure. He held the lantern very still and looked. A single drop fell from the canopy above. He heard it land somewhere to his left, soft and precise, and the forest breathed around him, the enormous fern fronds very still in the warm and windless air, the darkness beyond the lantern's reach, a living darkness, unhurried and unconcerned. He could hear the stream from here, more clearly than from the camp, its voice low and steady and older than anything else on the island. He could hear, somewhere in the middle distance, the slow movement of something in the leaf litter, small, quiet, going about its business with no interest whatsoever in him. He thought almost certainly the first person to have held a lantern up to this particular flower on this particular evening. This thought did not make him feel important. It made him feel quiet. He stayed a little longer. Then he stood, carefully, so as not to brush the vine, and walked back to the camp. counting the paces in reverse, the lantern steady in his hand, and the image of those pale, translucent blooms already arranging itself in his mind into something he would need paper to hold properly. Sella looked up when he returned. She looked at his face for a moment, reading something there, and the corner of her mouth moved in what was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one, the expression of someone recognizing a feeling without needing to be told what caused it. Edmund sat down at his table and turned to a fresh page. He sharpened the pencil, a brief, precise operation, the blade of his small penknife moving in careful strokes, the shavings curling to the table in thin ribbons, and then he began to draw. He began with a single bloom. The overall form first, the circle of it, the way the petals arranged themselves, not in perfect symmetry, but in something more natural than symmetry. The slight variations in their width and curve that made the flower look grown rather than constructed. He worked slowly. He kept the lantern close, tilted at an angle so the light fell across the page, without creating shadows that would interfere with what he was doing. The pencil made its soft sound, a steady, small scratching that was not unlike the sound of rain on certain surfaces, and beneath it, beneath the pencil, and the dripping canopy, and the low murmur of the stream, was the complete and undemanding silence of the island evening. He drew the petals. Each one received his full attention. Not one by one, he was not a person who drew a flower petal by petal, finishing each before moving to the next, but in the way a botanist draws, building the whole form gradually, returning to each area to deepen and refine, letting the drawing accumulate the way understanding accumulates, not all at once, but in layers, each layer adding something small and making the thing more true. He drew the stamens. He spent a long time on the stamens, the way they rose in that tight column, the slight spacing between them, the dusting at their tips that he rendered as a careful, light hatching. He drew the calyx where the petals joined it. He drew a portion of the vine, enough to show its character, the way it attached to the larger stem and the precise distance between this flower and the next. Then he paused and looked at what he had. Good. It was good. But the page felt unfinished in the lower left corner, a large white space where the eye wanted something to rest. He turned back to the image in his mind, 20 paces away in the forest. The vine draped along the root of the great tree, and made a decision. He would add a second bloom, smaller, slightly behind, and to the left of the first, as it might appear if you were looking along the length of the vine rather than directly at it. He began to draw it. This second bloom he drew more loosely, the way a thing in the background is allowed to be less fully realized, present but not insisting. He was aware, drawing it, of how much pleasure there was in this, in the small decisions, the adjustments, the moments when the pencil knew something his mind had not yet formulated. He was aware of the fire burning lower across the ring of stones, the coals at its center now more orange than red, the small warmth of it reaching him across the distance. He was aware of the smell of the specimens on the table, the papery green of the folio mixing now with the sweet warm scent of the 3 orange fruits still sitting in their leaf wrapping. He was aware of Sella. She had not moved from her place by the tree root. Her hands had slowed in their work, not stopped, but slowed, and she was looking at the fire with the particular stillness of someone who is thinking about something without any urgency whatsoever. The length of fiber in her hands was longer now, transformed into the beginning of something that had a pattern to it, though he could not from this distance make out what it was meant to become. He finished the second bloom. He sat back and looked at the drawing for a long moment, the lantern casting its amber warmth across the page, and he was aware quietly, without quite saying it to himself, that this was one of the better things he had drawn. Not the most technically perfect, but the most true to what he had seen. There was something in the rendering of those thin petals, the suggestion of light passing through them, that he thought he had not quite managed before. He wrote beneath the drawing, night-blooming vine, species unknown, petals translucent, 6 to 8 per bloom, scent, warm, floral, persistent. Opens only after dusk. He paused, then added, lantern lit, 20 paces into tree line, south of camp. First observation, evening of 4th day. And then Sella spoke. One word. She said it quietly, without looking up from the fire, and then she glanced across at the drawing just briefly, just enough, and there was in her expression the particular quality of recognition, of seeing something known, something that had been there before and had a name, and was simply being seen again by someone new to it. She said the word the way one says the name of an old friend encountered in an unexpected place, with certainty and without drama. Edmund looked at her. He looked at the drawing. He looked back at Selah, and she met his eyes for a moment with the same easy patience she always had, and then looked back at the fire. He picked up the pencil and wrote the word in the margin of the page, beside the drawing, careful to render the sounds as accurately as he could in the letters he had. He did not know what it meant. He knew he would want to remember it. He underlined it once, lightly, the way he underlined measurements, not for emphasis, but for the small gesture of care, the indication that this mattered. He set the pencil down. Sella reached into the front of her wrapped cloth and produced a small knife, flat-bladed, its handle worn smooth, and she moved to the table and took one of the orange fruits and cut it cleanly in half. She set half in front of him and kept the other in her hand, and she cut a wedge from hers and ate it with the easy satisfaction of someone who knows something good when she has it. Edmund looked at the cut surface of his half. The flesh was a pale gold inside, lighter than the skin, almost cream at the center, deepening to amber at the edges. It was dense and smooth-looking and very slightly yielding when he pressed it with his thumb, and the smell intensified as the surface opened to the air, warmer now, more present, the floral sweetness deepened by something that might have been vanilla and might have been something else entirely, something with no European equivalent and no European name. He cut a wedge and tasted it. Cool. That was the first thing. It was cool. The way dense fruit can hold the coolness of the shade it grew in even after hours of being carried. Sweet. But not insistently sweet, a sweetness that opened as he chewed, layers of it. The floral note, and underneath that something almost rich, like the sweetness had weight to it, like cream. The texture was smooth and yielding without being wet, a texture like very good custard made cold. Close-grained, holding its shape against the tongue before dissolving. He chewed slowly. He swallowed. He sat for a moment with the taste of it. Then he looked at Sella, who was eating her wedge with perfect equanimity, and he said, quietly, "That is extraordinary." She looked at him. He gestured toward the fruit and made an expression that he hoped communicated. Extraordinary, remarkable. What is this? How have I lived without this? And she tilted her head slightly in the way that meant she had understood the spirit of what he was expressing, and the corner of her mouth moved in that same almost smile, and she looked back at the fire. They ate in comfortable silence. He ate 2 wedges. He meant to eat only one, or he told himself he meant to eat only one, but the second came almost without deciding, the knife moving of its own accord, the wedge lifting to his mouth. He ate it more slowly than the first. He paid attention to it the way he paid attention to specimens, with the same quality of respectful focus, trying to notice everything there was to notice before it was gone. The fire had burned low. The coals at its center were a deep, steady orange red. the color of something that has been burning for a long time and is content to burn for longer still, not dramatically, not urgently, just continuing in its patient and warming way. The flames were almost gone. There was just the coal light now, that gentle, breathing glow that a fire settles into when it has passed its energetic phase and arrived at something calmer. Neither of them added more wood. It did not feel like a decision. It felt like the evening simply had enough warmth in it already, and more wood would have been more than was needed, and both of them understood this without saying so. Edmund closed his journal. He did it carefully, as he always did, checking first that the ink on the last entry was dry, then folding the cover closed and placing it in the center of the table, squarely. Beneath its cover, pressed between the pages he had written on tonight, was the word Selah had given him. The drawing, the measurements, the small, precise record of a flower that opened only for darkness, only for anyone patient and quiet enough to be there when it did. He looked at the folio. He looked at the journal. He felt, quietly, without announcing it to himself, that the restlessness of the early evening was gone. He could not have said exactly when it had left, somewhere between the lantern being lit and the drawing of the second bloom, somewhere in the forest with the translucent petals and the warm, sweet smell, somewhere in the patient scratch of pencil on paper and the taste of the unknown fruit it had simply dissolved, the way such things dissolve when the right combination of occupation and beauty and human nearness is present. It had not been replaced by anything dramatic. It had been replaced by this particular quiet. Selah set her weaving work back into the pouch at her belt. She stood, smoothing her hands together, and looked at the sky for a moment. The stars visible through the canopy gap in much greater numbers now, the full depth of the southern sky opening overhead, dense and unhurried. She said her goodnight. One phrase in her language, soft, familiar by now. He knew its shape, even if he was still uncertain of all its sounds, and she gathered her things with the same unhurried ease with which she did everything, and she moved to the forest path and was gone, her footsteps quiet on the leaves, and then not even that. Edmund sat for a moment in the amber circle of the lantern. He listened to the stream, very faintly, through the trees. He listened to the drip from the canopy, slower now, each drop further from the last. The night warming slightly so that the water on the broad leaves was beginning to evaporate rather than fall, the drops coming only every half-minute or so now, each one landing with that same small, precise percussion on the moss below. He listened to the coals settle once, softly, in the fire ring. He reached over and turned the lantern down, not out, just lower. The wick reduced to the smallest flame that would still burn steadily, the amber circle of light contracting around him to something smaller and warmer, closer. He stood slowly, his joints reminding him that he had been sitting on a wooden camp chair for several hours, and he moved to the entrance of the tent and set the lantern just inside on the small folding stool he used as a bedside table, so that it would keep burning without risk. The warm amber glow of it was visible through the canvas, a steady thread of light against the dark. He walked to the hammock. It was strung between the two broad-trunked trees just beyond the tent, canvas, simple and good, worn to a pale softness from use. He sat on the edge of it, and it gave under him and swung slightly. And he lifted his feet from the ground and settled himself back into it and lay still, feeling the canvas take his weight along the full length of him, cradling him with the particular gentle support of a hammock, different from a bed, less flat, more enveloping, like being held rather than merely supported. He let out a long, slow breath. Above him, through the gap in the canopy, the sky was full. He had seen skies like this before, on clear nights in open country, away from towns. The sky filled to its edges with stars, but this sky was different in a way he found difficult to account for. Perhaps it was the latitude. Perhaps it was the warmth of the air, the way the warm air seemed to make even the light of the stars feel closer. Perhaps it was simply the 4 days on this island. 4 days without seeing another person's lamp or hearing another person's voice until Sela had quietly appeared at the camp's edge each evening. 4 days in which his eyes had adjusted to something, not just darkness, but a quality of attention, a willingness to look. The stars were dense and still. They did not seem to move, though he knew they were moving. Everything moving. The whole vast patient enterprise of the night sky, turning slowly above the warm and sleeping island. The fern fronds were motionless in the windless air. One of them, the largest, hanging just at the edge of his sight, was silhouetted against the stars very precisely, each frond finger dark and still and perfectly itself. He felt his breathing slow. He felt the canvas of the hammock,